Hi, everybody. Welcome to Magic Universe. In this episode of Magical Worlds, I'm going to talk about the show Manifest, which I watched on Netflix, the first two seasons. But before I do that, I want to give you some news about Lucifer. Lucifer actually has a season 6. I didn't know that. I totally thought that they ended the series after 5 seasons and just the way they ended it, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then, I found out that season 6 is coming on September 10th, and I was so excited. I was like, oh, there's more. So it'll be so interesting to see how they're going to tell the story now that what's happened has happened at the end of season 5. So I'm really excited about that. And that's also showing on Netflix. Okay, so let's talk about Manifest. Manifest is a show about a plane full of people who take off from one location to another location, and midway somewhere they hit some turbulence, and then they land the plane. I mean, it turned out fine, right? But when they landed the plane, they found out that they were like 5.5 years in the future. Like the whole rest of the world had gone on without them because they basically disappeared from the regular timeline. And so the people on that plane, for them, no time has really passed except for the length of the flight. But the rest of the world, they're like 5.5 years older. So what's interesting is that the main characters in this show is a particular family, it's the Stone family. So there's Ben, and then there's his sister Michaela, and Cal, who is Ben's son. They, of the Stone family, were on that flight 828. And then Grace, who's Ben's wife, and Olive, who is Cal's twin, they took a different flight. So they moved on 5.5 years in the future. So it's interesting to see the dynamic between the twins, where Cal is still like 10.5 years old and Olive is about like close to 16, something like that, right? And so because the passengers on flight 828 were presumed dead because they disappeared for so long, the half of the family that went on into the future, like they moved on, because they thought that these people were dead, right? And so Grace started a different relationship. And also Michaela, who had been proposed to prior to getting on the plane. She hadn't answered yet, but she did have like a boyfriend / almost fiance. Well, he went on to marry her best friend. And so the relationships like completely changed when these people disappeared, and then you get to see how they deal with it when they come back, when they show up again. And you also get to see like how the world, like the government and everybody else reacts to these people coming back. Is like, how are they back? And there are all sorts of different explanations or theories, or like some people think that they're aliens or they're not even themselves, or like they just come up with all sorts of different ways to try to explain what happened, and the people on the flight, they themselves don't know what happened, right? So another interesting thing, or the really interesting thing, is that these people who come back on that flight, they now have these abilities, and they're hearing voices, they're seeing visions, and they don't really know what it's about. And some of them follow these what they end up terming them as callings. They end up following these callings to see where they're led, and you get to see them being led to all these like very synchronistic events where things come together. The tone of the show at the very beginning, the first line is Michaela's voice saying, "Funny how one little decision can ruin your life, but also save it." So it follows that where it feels like everything's all terrible, but then good things happen in the end. So and the show kind of follows that same flow. Also, another thing that kind of sets the tone of the show is that Ben and Michaela's mom was very religious, right? And so her favorite quote from the Bible is, "All things work together for good," and it's Roman 8:28, and that's the number of the flight too. It's 828, and you'll see 828 throughout different places during the show, like on a clock or on a sign or something like that, on an address, and that number just keeps showing everywhere on the show, which is really interesting. People have compared the show to Lost, and I guess in that way you try to find little clues and stuff like that to figure out what actually happened to these people. It's kind of like Lost. And I'll also make a comment about this later on when we get into the spoiler part of this episode. Yeah, but the full quote of "all things work together for good" is actually, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." And so because Michaela's mom was religious, when Michaela lands from this flight and all this stuff starts happening to her and she starts hearing all these voices and seeing visions and stuff like that, she starts to kind of turn towards her faith in order to try to explain all the stuff that's happening in her life. And so she follows a path of faith, and then Ben, who's her brother, follows the more scientific path, probably because he's a mathematician, he is a math professor. And so there's that kind of dynamic where it's like, do you take a more faith approach towards what's happening, or do you try to explain it with more logic and science towards what's happening? And so there were 191 people on Flight 828. And so throughout the seasons, you get to meet more and more of the other passengers and the things that they've been feeling called to, and their stories. And you kind of get to learn about everybody and what their life was like prior to getting on that flight and how it's changed now that they're back. I found that the show got pretty emotional, and that totally makes sense because it's about a family that got split up, right? And now they're coming back together, and so it's a lot about relationships, and but then it also talks about like conspiracies. It talks about it gets really exciting as you continue on, and there's a lot of action that takes place. So, yeah, I watched the first two seasons so fast. Like, you just, after one episode, you're like, I gotta find out what's gonna happen next. So I just kept watching it. And before I knew it, I finished like two whole, seasons of it. And so, yeah, if this sounds interesting to you and you haven't started watching it yet, I totally recommend it. There is a season 3 that's not on Netflix. It's currently being shown on Peacock, and which you can watch for free either on their app or through their website. Oh, and the first thing that I noticed when I started watching this show was that Ben is actually Prince Charming from Once Upon a Time. So I was like, oh, it's him. And I got really excited because he's totally cute. Okay, so now I'm gonna get to the spoilery parts. So if you haven't watched it, go ahead and skip out on this and come back to it later. Ready? Okay. So I really liked how everybody, I mean, they fight during this show because of all the differences that occur throughout the story, but that eventually everybody actually ends up getting closer because they had been separated and now they're coming back together again. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if they had been together the whole time, maybe they could have resolved their differences too. But like prior to getting on the plane, their lives were not perfect. And it's kind of like this separation, this event that happens to them, and then them coming back together and having to deal with that occurrence, and then also having to deal with their relationships. Like they're forced to make the decision, you know, now that these people are back, like, are you gonna embrace them and resolve any difficulties that were in the relationship before, and then also now that they're back, it's like, are you, it's like, it's basically somebody coming back from the dead, right? That you have a second chance with these people. You know, are you going to really, really embrace that and try to make things work out? And I feel like with Ben and Michaela's brother and sister relationship, I really like that, you know, towards the beginning, they were kind of like brother and sister. They fought a lot, right? But that as they begin to solve these puzzles together, that they end up really learning to see each other's point of view and talk to each other and understand each other's point of view. And it's so interesting, especially with Ben and Michaela, where Michaela at first was more trying to follow faith, right? Even though she didn't like 100% fully believe in God, that became her only way to try to explain the crazy stuff that was happening, right? And I think it also had to do with her love for her mom and how much her mom believed. And now that, you know, her mom has gone during the time that Michaela wasn't there, and by kind of following more her faith, like in the footsteps of her mom's faith, then she's kind of like honoring her mom's memory and honoring her mom's beliefs by doing that. And so it's interesting to see during the course of the two seasons how Ben and Michaela switch places in their beliefs, because Ben before was like, no, don't call this magic, like, no, don't you know, try to apply any kind of frou-frou explanations to this, because you're just being lazy if you're calling it magic. You're just being lazy if you're calling it anything other than trying to explain it in a logical, scientific way, right? But then, because of his love for Cal, and Cal just, you know, he's a little kid. He just follows whatever happens. He can't even explain it. And Cal's abilities are like stronger than everybody else's for some reason. And he just goes and follows it without questioning it. And Ben, witnessing that and seeing how Cal could be in more trouble because his abilities are stronger, more, you know, more trouble from people who want to use his abilities for their own purposes. And so Ben is actually forced to have to follow Cal's beliefs because they have all come true and led to something, right? And like his desire to really protect his family like forces him to have to believe. And so he at towards the end of season 2 is like taking on the stance of, no, we have to follow, you know, what was showing up in that journal that they found, the Alzuris's journal, where it talks about in order to defy the death date that you have to follow the callings and do what it says. And then in reverse, like Michaela, because of the stuff that was happening to Zeke and how Zeke was dying and she couldn't explain it, and like she, you know, her callings were calling her to do things that she felt were illogical to her, that didn't make sense to her, that you know, she had to free that bad guy or those 3 bad guys. And so she started to not believe and started defying the callings. And so I thought that was interesting how she and Ben switch places in terms of their how they're using either faith or logic to explain or to decide whether to follow the callings or not. But then at the very end of season 2, how they ended it, with with Zeke coming back to life. I really, really wish that they had shown exactly how life came back into Zeke, but in that particular scene when he came back to life, they were only showing the glow like bouncing off of Michaela's face. Like they didn't actually show Zeke's face and how like the light entered him. But I really wish that I could see that. But yeah, now that he's come back, I think she also is following with Ben's lead that they should just follow the callings and do what it says, to just believe that it'll take them to a good place and be able to survive the death date. Oh, speaking of glows, there was this one part that gave me chills, that got me all tingly, was when the first time Ben looked through the journal, Alzuris's journal, and he was seeing the picture of a guy carrying a girl, which to him looked like the instance when he was carrying Olive out of that burning club, right? And there was the star above his head in the picture and stuff like that, and that just totally made me all tingly. I was like, ooh, that is so cool. The way like the journal started glowing, and just that whole storyline about the tarot card and how Olive and Grace went and got a tarot reading, I thought that was totally cool. And that deck was gorgeous. I know somebody who watched the show and saw that deck and tried to look up that deck to see if it was real, but it's not real. It's just made up for the show. But if it were real, I would totally go get that deck too. So, Ben and Grace's relationship. I have to say, I was not a fan of Grace in the beginning. And for like the biggest part of the story, where she was just very difficult. But I have to say, because I'm psychic, that I'll always be on the side of the person with the magical abilities or with the unusual abilities that the majority of people don't understand, that cannot be explained by science. So it became such a relief when finally everything was explained to Grace and she came on board with the whole calling thing. And it was so cool, that one scene where they were in Cal's bedroom and they were looking at his drawing of them standing in his bedroom, realizing that same exact moment. And it was kind of like them living that moment just validated the whole explanation about the callings and stuff like that to Grace. And then ever since everybody came on board, like, and they explained everything to Olive too, and they felt more like a family, it was such a relief to me to watch them all working together. I mean, there were still some moments when people felt left out, and especially after Grace herself started getting callings too because of the baby. Oh, and that part was so exciting when when Grace had her first calling and Ben realized, like, oh, the baby must be his and not the other guy's, because Grace is having the callings through the baby, through her pregnancy. And I was like, oh, that is so cool. I loved when that happened. But anyway, yeah, so Olive felt left out because now everybody in the family is getting callings and they might all die from the death date. Like, they don't know, right? And Olive was afraid that she would be left alone, if that were to happen, which is kind of sad. But Olive tends to be a little emo, or a lot emo, which, her being a teenager and everything, that's totally understandable. But I think I like watching her grow up during the course of the story, and especially like when she starts hanging out with and dating TJ. I feel like he's really good for her, like a really stabilizing force for her, and for her to just like not run off with her feelings and stuff like that, and make rash decisions about things. Even the part where he's now at the end of season 2, he's now deciding to go off to Egypt to study and possibly try to figure out Alzuris's whatever he knew, what the history of whatever he knew, and to figure out the death date and see if they can find some way out of that. It was really mature of her to say, I'm not going to go with you because I want to spend more time with my family in case, the death date were to happen, then this is the only time that she has left with them. And also that she wants her little baby sister who was just born to grow up knowing her, and not to just disappear from their lives and run off with her boyfriend. I felt that was really mature of her to make that decision. Okay, now Michaela and Jared. This was a roller coaster ride. At first it kind of seemed like, oh, it's so, you're kind of rooting for them, even though he's married. I kind of felt like if you're the person who's stuck between two people, or deciding between two people, it's like if he really felt that he was afraid to see Michaela when she first came back because he was afraid that he was just going to run off with her and leave his wife. If he really felt that, he should have just came out straight and told Lourdes, his wife, exactly how he felt, because you can't really blame him, because Michaela disappeared. He thought she was dead. Like, he was all ready to marry her, and he thought she was dead. And now it turns out, oh wait, no, she's not dead. Like, if he had gone to Lourdes in the first place and said, oh hey, my feelings were never resolved with this other relationship, and I need to figure out how I feel about this. Like, he could have just gone to her and told her all that instead of chasing after Michaela the way he did. And I kind of felt that same way about Grace choosing between Ben and Danny too, where she was the one in the middle and she was just indecisive about which way she wanted to go at first. And that was frustrating as a viewer, because I felt like either make a choice or don't make a choice, but don't leave everybody hanging, So when Jared started kind of going off the rails, I mean, later on you find out that, oh, he was undercover, but at first when you don't know, then it's kind of like, dang, what is wrong with this guy? Is like, he hates Michaela so much, and it wasn't even her fault, because I didn't feel like she came back and wrecked his life. I felt like a lot of the stuff that happened in his own life were of his own doing, and so I was like, dang, what is wrong with this guy? Why is he being such a horrible person when he was so sweet before, right? And then you find out that, oh, wait, he's undercover. I mean, and even before the reveal, when he was going off with the extras and stuff like that, but he was still showing in certain scenes where he cared about Michaela, I kind of wondered, like, is he undercover? Maybe he's undercover because he still cares about her as a person. He still cares for her safety and her life and stuff like that, because he saved her a couple of times. But before that happened, when he was just going off about how Michaela ruined his life, I was like, dang, dude, it's not even her fault. Like, it's your own doing. And they played that up to the extreme, in terms of how emotional he got about it. And then, in a way, it's kind of not believable in the sense that he felt so much hatred, and then immediately after the reveal that, oh, he was undercover, then it's like, oh, I'm totally cool with everything. You're with the new guy, that's fine. I'm fine with that. Like, and I'm a good guy now again, and I know that they did it on purpose that way, but it it's like you're playing with the emotions of the viewer, and it's like, oh, it's not believable that you heightened your roller coaster to the extreme, and it's like all of a sudden, no, nothing, I'm fine now, Okay, so Michaela and Zeke. I was actually pretty okay with her, like right after having the night with Jared, and then she kind of like had regrets about it, right? And then she meets Zeke, and then I'm like, oh, I think I kind of prefer her with this new guy rather than with that mess that that has now developed with Jared and Lourdes, right? And I really liked that scene when Michaela and Zeke were up in the mountains when they first met, and he held out his hand to her, and then she took it and stepped up on the ledge, and they both saw that pictograph on the wall, and it's of the two of them holding hands. And I was like, total soulmate moment. That was so cool. And just that whole storyline about how Zeke and that other guy, was it Griffin? That, both of them weren't on the plane, but yet they both came back from the dead too. And so that's so interesting that now not only are the passengers on flight 828 disappearing for an amount of time and coming back from, quote, the dead, although, like the people on the plane never really died, you don't think. But then, and even with Zeke, like from his own experience, he never really died. But that guy who went underwater in the armored truck, he did die. He did actually die and come back from drowning. Or maybe he just like went unconscious and came back from his own experience. It was never, I don't think they ever really explained it. But I thought that was interesting that now they've taken it outside of just that flight to other people. And so I don't know how they're going to explain it. Ooh, and then that last scene in the finale of the second season where the fishing boat fishes out remnants of the Flight 828 airplane. And when that first happened, so here's my other lost thought. So if you have not watched Lost, maybe you want to skip over to the next part. I'll put timestamps in the description. Okay, ready? So when they first fished that out of the water, I was like, whoa, are they pulling a Lost? Because like with Lost, how they ended it was that Jack had been dead for some part of the time before he finally found out that he had been dead for some part of the time, right, of the story. And so it's like when they fished out that plane, that part of the plane, I was like, wait, are they pulling a Lost? But they wouldn't, right? Because everybody is already comparing their show to Lost. Like they would have to be way more creative to come up with some other explanation for all the stuff that's going on. So I don't think that they're going that route, but I was like, whoa, what's happening? And then I was like, maybe they're doing like an alternate reality thing where in one reality, the plane did crash and go down. And so there is a version of these people that are dead. And then there's this other version of reality where they didn't die and the plane landed, but they landed in the future. I don't know. There's this whole like Bermuda Triangle thing going on, and I think where the plane went down, or where they're fishing up the plane, isn't that kind of near where the Bermuda Triangle is? So I don't know if they're gonna play that angle in the story. And also the people who, like, during the course of watching this show, when people died, I never really believed it. Like when Vance, they said Vance was dead. I was like, I don't believe that. And then he came back, right? I mean, it turned out that he faked his death. And then when TJ died, and I'm like, no, like, unless you show me his body, unless you show me the body, I'm not gonna believe that anybody is dead, right? And then it turned out that he wasn't dead either. And then Zeke was dying, and then he was dead, and then there was his body. I'm like, no. And then of course he came back alive. So I kind of feel like nobody ever really dies on the show, not for real. Even like the pilot and that professor lady, what was her name? Fiona, the lady who was studying this kind of networked brains thing that is kind of like behind all of this, you know, their abilities and all the passengers' connectedness with each other. Like when their plane disappeared and supposedly it was destroyed by the missiles, I don't believe that. Maybe they did end up in the future somewhere. I think that maybe they had another dark lightning moment and flew into another timeline, because they were never able to find the remains, like the leftover parts of the plane. So one last thing that I want to talk about is that Ben is such a good guy. Like, can you imagine? He comes back, he finds his wife with another guy, he finds his daughter thinking of this other guy as like her second dad. And he's so, I mean, he's hurt by it, but at the same time, the way he reacts to that is like, okay, I take responsibility for not being here, and it's totally understandable that you would find solace in this new relationship with this other person. And he's totally so emotionally stable about that, and I really like that about Ben. I mean, there were places where he, you know, where he would rush off to confront enemies and stuff like that, where it's kind of like, okay, hold your horses, Ben. But for the most part, you know, when dealing with his family members, it's always the love that he feels for them comes first. Like, no matter, it's kind of like whatever is best for them, that's what he chooses. And I was like, this guy is a really, really good guy. Okay, that's all I can think of to talk about for the first 2 seasons of Manifest. If I remember anything else, I will talk about it when I talk about season 3, which I'm going to start watching after I finish this recording. I made myself promise myself that I would not start watching season 3 until I finish this recording. So that is my reward for doing this recording right now, is that I get to start watching season 3. Oh, one more thing. That was so cool and so kind of like scary when there was that part in the Alzuris's journal that Ben is now living his life by, where it says you have to, in order to defeat the death date, you have to follow the callings. And then it says something like any other path leads to disaster or something like that, right? And then Sanvi is going off on her own, like trying really hard to get rid of the callings entirely. And so that's like the other path, right? And then her face shows up in one of the drawings of the people that are in disaster from trying to outrun the death date or to outrun the callings. So I was like, oh my God, that's her face in the drawing from, like, I don't know, the 1600s. That's so weird. That's so weird and that's so cool. Anyway, okay, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about Manifest, the first 2 seasons. I will come back and talk about the third season when I'm done with that. Okay, so I will talk more next time. Bye.